cheap. You know, do you know what I mean? Like something you buy from the pound shop. It does. It looks like the copper of something that's really expensive.
I think it might have been expensive once when he first got it, but that was maybe 17 years ago. So
right. Let me try. I can only hear you through here, so I'll try and hear you through there in case there's feedback. 1 minute.
Okay.
And now, Jay, you're coming in my ears. Hey,
coming in your ears. Hey. You broke up slightly. Then I don't know if that was me or you, but you seem all right now. Yeah, you're all right.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it was the transition between AirPods and Mac. Check us out, fucking tech geeks, beware.
Listen,
how you doing?
I'm all right, mate. We're like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates.
Pound shop version. That's we are the the Poundland version of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates.
If Steve Jobs and Bill Gates came from Eccles and Longsight, then they'd be us. We'd be them.
Fucking hell. This is another episode of Scotty and Motty, as you lot out there. What?
Go on. Have you got your 5?
We'll just go into it. And you know, we'll just see how it goes. Yeah, they've been asking for top 5s and stuff. So tonight we're going to do a top 5s, 90s UK icons. That doesn't include sports people. And we may double up because we've not really rehearsed this. But you know, Jay, we're like nearly 40, or you're plus 40, and we've been flying by the seam of our pants for the best part of our lives. So fuck it. You know, what's us to say? In for the goose. Well, I don't know.
What's good enough for the goose is good enough for the gander.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I was going.
I don't know. I don't even know what you're on about, if I'm being brutally honest.
I just spent the day at the Science and Industry Museum, mate.
Oh, mate, no, that's not the one. I don't envy that. How was it?
It was very sciencey and industrial.
Was there a lot there? Because last time I went, half of it was shut down.
Yeah, no, a lot of it was shut down, but you know, there was a lot of science experiments going on and stuff from the industrial age. I always think the Museum of Science and Industry is like the Ron Seal of museums, though. Do you know what I mean? You know what you're going to get.
Does what it says on the tin.
Yeah. There's lots of mechanics and shit going on. But I was stood there outside in the pissing down rain, and I know you're a fan of The Wire, so you'll appreciate this. And I was literally looking across the skyline of Manchester, like Frank Sobotka. Do you know that line where he goes, you know, we used to always build shit in this place. And that's what I sort of look back and I seen pictures of fucking trains and Alan Turing and stuff. And I'm like thinking, you know, it's great coming from this city. And then I think now everything's just online and digital and apps, and it's just, there's not anything sort of tangible. I'm getting all teary-eyed and romantic about how we used to, you know, make guns and cotton and shit. But good times.
Well, this is the it's a new age. You know, and like you took your kids around the Museum of Science and Industry. One day, you know, our grandkids will show their grandkids or their kids our videos on YouTube. Yeah. And say, look, you know, this is what your great granddad or whatever it is. I've forgotten my trail, but whatever they are. This is what your great granddad used to do. And they'll be like, "What's that? Look at him drinking out of a cup." How weird's that?
It's not even in 3D. Fucking how old are you? Look at him.
Why can't we smell him? What's going on? There's not smelly vision on this. This is why has he got headphones with a wire? What's all that about? Has he not had his headphone implants?
It will be scary.
This level of nonsense is what you should expect from us for the next hour, because we don't rehearse. We don't know what we're talking about. We don't even know. I'm not even clear on the topic, right? So I'm going to let him go first, and then I'm going to do what I've always done in my life for the last 20 years. I'm just going to copy him.
You do pretty well. Your new house looks pretty nice.
Yeah, it's all right, mate. It's nice. We're just, basking in the glory of having our own bathroom, me and the missus.
You mean so you don't have to share with next doors?
Yeah, well, we used to have it out in the yard in my previous house. So, and it didn't have a roof. So, it's good for stargazing when you're on the toilet. But no, we don't have kids constantly. You know what kids are like in bathrooms.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Right. And they always announce what they're going to do as well, don't they?
Mm.
Right, I'm having a poo.
Yeah, and you get a running commentary of it.
Yeah, when I'm in the shower, like, I'm just coming in to have a poo.
Yeah,
right, thanks. Yeah. So now they've got their own. They're on their own floor, which is great.
Yeah.
Even though they do keep coming up to our floor every 5 minutes, but you know,
you've
can't
got
complain.
multiple floors, man. Gone from living in a fucking high rise. Not that you ever lived in a high rise. just to be clear, you have lived, yeah, but not with your parents. I don't think, have you?
Not with my parents, not with my family. During my
the squalor years.
Well, yeah, the squalor years. the research years, as I like to call them. When I was doing all the research, I did live briefly in the Seven Sisters, Grafton Court, for a little while. In Moss Side for about not long, a few months. But yeah, no. Other than that, I don't think I've actually lived in a high rise now.
Well, that's funny you mentioned about like the squalor years, because that's what we shall be returning to tonight when we look back into the 90s. A lot of you have been talking about getting into top fives. So as I know when you can see the exterior of me and Jay that we don't look like we were, you know, peaking in the 90s, but we were. And the way I was reflecting on this tonight, I was thinking the 90s were where we went fucking mental. And the sort of led into the noughties where we went mental. And then the last 10 years I've sort of been trying to backtrack and get on track from that. And now I'm hoping the 20s, whatever's left after this fucking pandemic, will sort of, you know, even it all out. But we're going to look back at the icons from the 90s. So we've decided not to do footballers because we think we'll do a special just on that because there's enough to go on. So it's UK 90s icons. So I'm going to shoot from the hip and hope that you haven't got the same person. So I'm going early doors on the 90s first. And this person is a actor, Scottish. First came onto the screens actually as playing the part of a Scouser. And the first time I actually seen the person I'm talking about, he actually shot the scene in my local shop back in Leather in the year 1992, screaming LIVERP, double OL Liverpool FC, and then went on to be a murderous Scouser in the fantastic series that I don't think has ever been beat for psychological thrillers, but then it was shot in Manchester as well. And the person I'm talking about, Robbie Carlyle, but also Robbie Coltrane was the lead character in Cracker, and such a fantastic series and cast as well. Obviously our own Christopher Eccleston was in that as well. But Robert Carlyle in the 90s as an actor was absolutely brilliant. Obviously in the role of Cracker. Then from there you can see how he was cast as Francis Begbie in Trainspotting. As well, and also went on to the Full Monty as well. When you're seeing his naked ass, doing his fantastic Sheffield accent. But I just think Robert Carlyle's the range. And when I was looking at actors, because I didn't want to just go down the musicians route for 1990s characters, but you know, if there's an actor there that had been on quite a lot of different roles and stuff, I think Robert Carlyle for me was up there. And that role from Cracker was just fucking harrowing, really, really good. And then again, Begbie as well, which was sort of relatable and a bit close to home on too many levels when I started entering my drinking years in the 1990s. He wasn't on crack, but he cracked a few people. Let's put it that way. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I've seen a few pint pots being chucked. To be honest, when you look at the cast of the people in Trainspotting, Begbie was the one that wasn't on heroin, but he's probably the least likable out of the whole out of the whole gang, and that's the weird sort of thing. And I'll talk about Trainspotting later on. But yeah, so I'm throwing Robbie Carlyle in as my actor in 1990s UK. British icons, 90s UK, same shit. Well, I really haven't rehearsed this. Yeah, icons from the 90s that were in the UK.
If we'd have had your way, this would be even more niche. I had to stop you because you were like 90s icons, British from, you know, in music industry, sort of post the 1992 election. I was like, well, let's slow down. Let's just stick to the 90s.
I just thought if we niche it down, we'll get a real hardcore audience.
Well, you've got like 100 choices. You're like that with him, and I'm like, I always get confused. I'm a bit older than you, and I'm always like, is that the 90s? Was that the 90s? Is that an icon? Is it? I always get a bit like, I'm never sure, but I love your choice there. I don't know if it's 90s, but Riff Raff is a film that he's in. I don't know if you've seen that.
Ken Loach.
Brilliant film. Film. I've got a funny story about Robert Carlyle, actually. It's not one of mine, but you mentioned Cracker, and I read Ricky Tomlinson's book, his autobiography. and he said that he was in Cracker Ricky Tomlinson. I think he was Robbie Coltrane's boss.
He was the boss, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's like DIYs, I think, or whatever his name was. And he said he had to ask Robbie Carlyle a question, and it was in the middle of the night. He wasn't sure what time the shoot was the next day. So he said, I rang him at his hotel at like, it was late, but I said I needed to know, I was panicking, thinking I'm going to miss the time. So I rang him and it was like midnight or whatever. And he said he was asleep, and he woke up and he answered the phone with a Scouse accent because he was that
ingrained in the...
Like, yeah, he didn't even like, it wasn't like, because obviously he's not a Scouse, he's Scottish, as you just said, but he was that in it, in that time and in it. And I remember that. And I remember I still think about that a little bit because it was very easy to not like that character that Robbie Carlyle played in Cracker because, without giving anything, I'm sure we've all seen it, it's 20 years old. He kills Christopher Eccleston's character in that, who was a main sort of character, very likable, one of the main people in that series. And it was a shock when he did. And yet you can still feel a little bit of sympathy with him because he'd been through Hillsborough, and he talks about how after that, him and his dad had nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
He couldn't talk about football anymore because of Hillsborough. So he said, we had nothing. I remember him saying that. We had nothing to talk about. And he really did. He humanized it. And it wasn't just like, one-dimensional. And you sort of felt for him, even though what he'd done was horrible. And, that's not the way to react to something like that, obviously. But you sort of felt like, this guy's going through it. And as a football fan there's times when me and my dad have a very good relationship, but there's times when all we spoke about was football. And it always resonated with me with that, if you took that away, how difficult it would be at times to have anything to talk about. To the point where you couldn't even bring football up, that was what he was saying. But another thing I wanted to mention there as well is I can't emphasize how big a film Trainspotting was. It was an event. It was everywhere. Like posters were everywhere. Everyone was quoting it. Everyone was watching it. It was like Titanic in Britain. It was just fucking huge. And there was that song that I never liked. The
Underworld.
I always hated that. It was everywhere. And I couldn't stand it. I thought it was garbage. But
I did a cover version of that this year.
You what?
I did a cover version this year of that. I mean, me and Clint Boone were at an NSPCC gala event at the Midland Hotel. I was well off me nut. This was like just before the pandemic. It was early March, and gone there dressed to the nines. I get massive social anxiety, so I'm either don't want to talk to people when I'm in a crowded room, especially like posh environments. So then I started throwing drink down, and then next minute I've seen Clint's DJ and going over to Clint. I'm like, you know what, Clint? These people need Underworld Born Slipper. So it's got me pissed on the stage. He's playing it. No fucker wanted it, Jay. Nobody wanted it at all. But I just carried on anyway. Lager. and then funnily enough, the last image that I have of that night is a bottle of Corona, a video image of a bottle of Corona on the table with the bubbles going up, and that was about March the 3rd, 4th.
Well, I'm sorry, Scotty. I love, I've been at a lot of your gigs and I love Clint Boone as well. But if I'd have been there, I'd have heckled you because I can't stand Born Slipping Underworld. It was constant. It was every. Honestly, man, I started going raving at this point. I remember once one of the DJs started playing it when we were out raving. I was like, what are you fucking doing? But yeah, Robert Carlyle, as you said, the Full Monty as well. Massive film on both sides of the Atlantic. Sort of no one saw that one coming.
No.
Sheffield steelworkers who start stripping. And yeah, boom, it was a huge hit, a real sort of feel-good film in a way. Do you know what I mean? Again, that dealt with issues, I
think and that film could be relevant today.
Do you know what? I love it when the debt collectors go around to his house and they're all there naked practicing. And he goes, put down and piss off. But it does, you're right, it deals with so many things. Or when the lad is in his car with the exhaust, tubes to the exhaust, trying to kill himself.
Oh, yeah.
And he fixes his car for him. He don't realise what he's doing. He fixes the engine and then realises and drags him out, doesn't he? Do you remember? And then he says, you bastard, and puts him back in. it's the humor and the drama and the tragedy are so well sort of
balanced
together, and it deals with those things of like that feeling of sort of disappointment and almost like you've let not like let everything down, but like really struggling to come to terms, like almost like you've been, what's the word, emasculated because you've lost your job. These are like tough working class men who just want to get a job, and they go to job club and stuff like that. Deals with the sort of the poverty that some of them are experiencing, or the struggling for cash, but also the humor and the way that they're able to persevere and come up with this absolutely crazy idea. And it almost seems like it's really, you never once think this is just far fetched. It's great.
Yeah.
And, I love Robert Carlyle in that, and he gets his accent spot on, he gets it just right. He's always very good at making you see it from his point of view and buying at what he's doing. And yeah, it's a great performance. It's a great film, The Full Monty. It's one of those that people often overlook, but it really is, because it is a funny little film in a way, but it's got something to say.
Yeah, I think it falls by the wayside, because I think when you look at all the 90s maybe as the Brit phenomenon, which was Britpop and all that. I mean, there was like exporting films and music and stuff. And I think that when you look at you have like Four Weddings and a Funeral, and it was the antithesis of that, really, wasn't it? I think, you had all these sort of middle class sort of people and the way they were living. And then they tried following suit, didn't they, with Full Monty, and then they had that, as it brassed off as well, which didn't really work as well. One thing I've always thought about Full Monty, how mad is it that it's a Sheffield film in the 90s and it didn't have Sean Bean in?
I can't believe it's a film that didn't have Sean Bean in the 90s.
Yeah, it didn't have Sean Bean. Let me double check. It didn't have Sean Bean in, did it?
No, didn't. I don't think Sean Bean does films in Sheffield because he can't get the accent right.
No. Apparently Sean Bean turned it down.
Did he? That's a good career.
Yeah.
I love the fact that Sean Bean, he plays, no matter who he is or what he is, like he's a Greek in Troy. Get the man back into lines. He's American in Don't Say a Word or whatever. It's like, you better go, you're gonna give me them chords. It's just like he always has that Sheffield accent. I admire that. Even in like Lord of the Rings, he's from Sheffield. You know what I mean? This may be Middle Earth, whatever it's called, but it's in Sheffield where he's from. Got to admire that. It's like Sean Connery in it. I'm doing it in my accent. End of.
Yeah.
I'm a Russian submarine captain with a Scottish accent. It's a fucking.
It gives us hope. I mean, if we ever want to, because I don't think we could lose our accents. Fucking Danny Dyer's made a career of it. I was watching The Bourne Identity earlier on, and
well, who's made a what?
Danny Dyer's made a career. Well, I'm not saying. Well, we've all had careers. I didn't say successful.
He's been paid money. Yeah, so I guess you're right.
Yeah, there's been shit football. They made a career out of it, mate. I'm fucking hell.
All right, fair enough.
I was watching Bourne Identity earlier on. Do you know when you watch football sometimes you think, I reckon I still got it in me. I'm like that when I watch the Bourne films. Really? I always think I've got an assassination in me still. Not like I could do that. Honestly, I'm not playing it for the camera. I literally sat downstairs, my kids were asleep, I was watching the Bourne Identity. I reckon I could still do that.
I'd have to go on a course. Send me on a 2K course. I could do that. I could go. I could travel around the world killing people and that.
Yeah.
Not on a Friday though. I've got to do the school run.
I was good at them shoot 'em ups in the arcades and all that.
That's isn't it?
I imagine so.
Know what I mean? Like, you're good at shoot 'em ups. You're quite a quick runner. You can drive. That's it, really, isn't it? You've got a passport.
That's all you need, man. Anyway, before we'll
put that one on hold. We'll file it in the maybe category of next career move.
I've had a diverse career, Jay. Wait till the next phone call. I'm going to be an assassin, but
listen, mate. I more or less poo-pooed in my head anyway. I didn't say it to you. You when you told me you were going to become a poet, and you made that work. So when you ring me up telling me you're going to become an international assassin, I'll just say good luck to you, son.
Yeah. The Sean Bean of MI5 will be. Anyway, right, next. Who's yours?
Right, I've just sort of cobbled together a list very quickly. And I'm going to go with the top one on my list again. I'm going to get it in quick before you do, I think, because you might have this one on your list.
Well, I thought you might do. I've got about 10, so go on.
I'm going to go with the less irritating Gallagher brother?
Oh, Paul.
Yeah. Them t-shirts don't tell themselves, you know. Makes a mean brew for his brothers. No, I'm going to go with Liam, purely because you talk about cultural icons from the 90s, full stop, let alone UK icons.
Yeah.
And Oasis were that, and Liam and Noel were obviously at the forefront. And Liam was the main man, he was the singer. He might not have written the songs, but if you were growing up in the 90s, no one really overly cared about that. He was the face of that band. He was everywhere. He was on every sort of magazine cover. He was doing loads of interviews. He was obviously performing constantly. I was fortunate enough to see him a few times in the 90s. Saw him at Main Road. I saw him at Nebworth. I was there in Nebworth in 96. I think we've spoken about this before. And he just had that something, you know, that swagger, that sort of just... It seemed real with Liam Gallagher. We had this period with bands in the 90s when this whole Britpop shite was invented. And it all seemed really sort of faux and fake, and a lot of them weren't working class lads. They weren't. They were, and there's nothing wrong with this, but they were middle class art students and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? They weren't from my area. They weren't talking to me, and they weren't someone that I could often relate to on a sort of personal level. I might like the music. I, for example, liked Blur. I didn't, you know, it's not like I dislike Blur. I think Part Life's a fantastic album. I still think that now. I can listen to that any day of the week. But the Gallaghers were like, they're like us. It's like, these guys are just from what Burnage are from, aren't they? Which is like a similar area to where me and you grew up. You know, he used to work in a fat show or something, didn't he, Liam? And I think then he was on the Dole. And then, you know, he's there, he's everywhere. He's sort of this just sort of juggernaut that took over the world for about 3 years. Oasis took over not just British pop music, or I shouldn't say pop music, British music, but also, you know, I think the What's the Story was a hit, big album in America, and Liam was just everywhere. And I, you know, when I used to go, went to see him a few times, it was weird because you always looked at him like, this guy's a bit of a knob, but it's sort of cool with it as well. Yeah. And it's that swag. Ian Brown had it, you know, that sort of.
Well, that's where that's where he sort of got it from, didn't he?
Yeah, of course he did. Of course he did.
He got like look for me and Brown, but he sort of took it and made it his own. And when you talk about other bands that followed suit, they didn't make it their own. They became parodies. And I think if you're looking for an example of a global icon, it's when you get people start trying mimicking you, and that's just not other bands who are trying to emulate your success or your style. That's every fucker down the pub. Do it that like how many people had them haircuts or were wearing the Burberry shirt that he wore in Wonderwall and stuff. He just, you know, he just oozed everything, didn't he? You know, he was charismatic. Everyone wanted to be his mate, but you wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of him. You know what I mean? All the women loved him and stuff, and it's fantastic. And to take all that away, amazing singer, absolutely phenomenal. And you know, I think that gets lost sometimes how great his vocals are, just because of his persona and his personality. I don't think that people actually give him the credit where it's due for that. I think, you know, Noel Gallagher gets credit for actually writing the songs, but I don't think Liam's voice, you know, gets the credit it deserves, because he's absolutely fantastic. But yeah, these hands down, he was the biggest icon of the 90s, without a shadow of a doubt. I
agree, and you know, I think we've spoken about this before. I got to interview him once, and I was so nervous, like, because whenever you put me in an interview situation with someone I've grown up with as like one of my, almost like a bit of a hero and someone I always looked up to. Like when I used to do the press conferences, I'd be so nervous, like, because I cared. And it was like that. We spoke about this. I saw you at the Supersonic premiere. You were there, and later on we went upstairs and I had to interview. It was like it's almost like a mix zone. He came down the line. He didn't. He sort of came bouncing in. He was off his head. And every other word was fucking, and it was just like by the time I'd finished my interview, I had about 8 seconds that I could use for the radio for what was, you know, a family radio station. But he was great. He was just like, it isn't a that with him. He is like that, and he was all right as well. He wasn't a dickhead. He was fine.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, like you say, he sort of summed up that attitude that a lot of us had in the 90s, and that sort of that feeling as well about. In many ways, a lot of people in the 90s associated Manchester with Oasis, rightly or wrongly. They did. you know, people started using like, you know, there's that thing. Remember Harry Enfield where
yeah, Kevin and Perrin.
Yeah, and she goes to Manchester, comes back drinking Oasis, calling everyone our kid and all that. There was an element of that in the press and in chat shows and stuff like that. And it was for a brief period. I think like 2 or 3 years. It was like, you know, it was all about being Mancunian and it was all about them. And you can look at it post that and say things sort of went a bit downhill, and especially Noel, he's not really revered at all now. I think Liam I still quite like some of Liam's music, and I think he's matured. He's got his kids and stuff like that. He's still, you know, has his moments.
But I mean, that's the thing. He's, like I said, he's matured, but I don't. I'm matured, Liam Gallagher. I don't think he's changed the person, because he was always the same person throughout. And that night at the Supersonic premiere, that was the first night I'd actually sat down and met him, because I was at the after party of the Supersonic at the Gotham Hotel. There's certain things I can't talk about on YouTube about that. But yeah, it was it was a cracking night. But I remember that I went with I brought my cousin with me to meet Liam, and then Liam walked up later on and was going round, and I think he was fist bumping everyone, and then he went over to fist bump my cousin Aaron, and then Aaron went like that, and then shaking his hand, and he felt really sort of, you know, meek about it, and like made a bit of a tip. But I've met Liam on a good few occasions. He's always been it's never any different, really. You know, it's because I think sometimes he plays up to the camera because he knows that sort of that the press will keep him in the headlines and stuff, and that generates, you know, he plays up to them a bit. But he was always sort of humble and all that. He was never arrogant or anything like that. Just always, he always was the guy that you'd expect to be in the pub, rightly or wrongly. Like, a bit of a loudmouth and stuff like that. But yeah, absolutely fantastic singer, and will always be the face of 1990s icons for me, always. I'll go on to my second one, who I think who will be the female equivalent of the 1990s UK icons, and that's got to be Kate Moss. She owned 1990s. Like, if Liam Gallagher was the man that was on the front of every 1990s newspaper or magazine, glossy magazine, I think she was on I think she made fame when she was like 18, wasn't she, on the front of Face magazine in 1990. And then from then on, she just became an absolute ridiculous superstar. I don't know, like everyone like looks back at the 90s and looks at Spice Girls as being girl power and stuff. She was fucking liberated from the gate, mate. You know what I mean? She lived it. Like, she was smoking, drinking, drugs, partying, having champagne baths with Johnny Depp. She was going out with for a while, wasn't she? She was left, right, and center, and she just wasn't giving a fuck at all. And very much in the same sort of way that, from two different complete backgrounds to Liam Gallagher, I think she was Southerner, wasn't she, Kate Moss? But yeah, she's
from Croydon. Yeah, she's from Croydon.
Croydon. Yeah, I didn't give a toss at all about anything, and just, you know, pin up, absolutely drop dead gorgeous and stuff, and yeah, absolutely owned it.
No, couldn't agree more. The thing is with the 90s, and I'm glad you chose a Supermodel, because I think some of that's not really relevant anymore. It's sort of looked down its nose a little bit at people. You know, models are just sort of made more or less social influencers now, and social media influencers. The 90s was the birth of the Supermodel movement, if you want, for a better word, where supermodels became this sort of real tour de force of nature. They had a lot of power. You know, they commanded ridiculous fees. They were in adverts. They were obviously, you know, all these new fashions that were coming out. We saw this fashion explosion in the 90s with people like Jean-Paul Gaultier. I think Alexander McQueen might have started in the 90s. Forgive me if I'm wrong on that one. It might have been a bit later, but around that time anyway. And you had the likes of Naomi Campbell. You had the likes of Linda Evangelista, Cindy Crawford. You know, I think if you want a sort of a quick 3-minute cap of who the main supermodel icons were at that time, go to George Michael's Freedom video, the revamp one. I think he did in 93 or whatever it was, or 96. I can't remember the year, but it's in the 90s and he has them all in it. But yeah, they were massive, the supermodels. And Kate Moss, I think, forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, I think she was spotted in Covent Garden shopping. And I think you're right, I think she was 17 when she first broke on the scene. And you know, she was just this girl from Croydon and who, you know, was working class and did sort of, I don't even think she tried to be a model. I think someone spotted her, saw that she had a look, and the rest is history. And yeah, you know, it's easy to be dismissive when you're looking at it through the prism of 2020, but in the 90s, these women just sort of exploded onto the scene and were everywhere. They're in interviews, they're in magazines, obviously. They're getting a lot of press. The celebrity press loved them because they were always, like you're saying, especially Kate going out partying and stuff, and they always made good for the paparazzis. So when you look at that, you have to sort of acknowledge that. And I'm glad you have picked a Supermodel, because that was a real part of the 90s in the same way that the Gallaghers were, the Supermodels were. And,
yeah.
I know we're not talking about football, but, sort of football, the Premier League was a massive thing. It became a thing in the 90s. And that was it. The 90s gave birth to that, the Supermodel sort of idea. And these women who were household names, I couldn't name you 5 Supermodels now if you put a gun to my head, but I could name you probably 5 from the 90s. Do you know what I mean? Because they were massive. They were everywhere.
And they weren't wallflowers either. I think when you compare, maybe, my knowledge of the models in the 1980s isn't fantastic, so I might be off the cuff here. But in the 80s, it just seemed that they were very much they were there to be looked at and not have a personality and not have a point of view or anything. And they weren't allowed to smoke and drink and rebel. And then if you look at the likes of Kate Moss and you're saying Naomi Campbell and stuff, these were strong, powerful women that were going to do live how they wanted to and were breaking molds. And it's interesting when we look at the likes of the characters that Robbie Carlyle was playing, the background of Liam Gallagher, a girl from Croydon in Kate Moss, black supermodel in Naomi Campbell. The 90s very much was about an uprising really of like working class. And this is why I think these people were so revered. It's because there's the number of rags to riches stories that sort of run through several different strands of the culture throughout the UK during the 1990s is phenomenal. And then because you've got these people making sure they're showing the general public that you can do this, that's why they get this platform, because the people support them and get behind them, because they're sort of living the dream through their eyes, aren't they? And it was happening left, right, and centre. We're not talking about sports tonight, but across sports, music, TV, supermodels, literature, everyone was sort of breaking through, and it was that. I think that's why the 90s is such a revered time.
No, you're right. You're right, and you mentioned it there as well. Like you had the movement with art. Damien Hirst and all these other artists who were doing these crazy things, like putting sheep or whatever it was in formaldehyde. I can never say the word formaldehyde. Forgive me, I've just butchered it, but pardon the pun. But you know what I mean. I don't even know I'm doing it anymore.
Yeah.
But it was such an exciting time, and it was like we took a step out of the 80s where certain things in the 80s just were looked on or dismissed, or you would never have a working class guy from the 80s who could name you some supermodels. You would never have a working class man or woman from the sort of a council estate in the 80s who probably could name you 3 or 4 artists. But in the 90s, you could, there was like the likes of Tracy Emin, the likes of Damien Hirst. These became sort of almost household names, like the Supermodels did with Naomi Campbell, with Kate Moss. All over music videos, everywhere you went, they were in the papers, in the press. It was sort of like a positive thing in a way. It felt exciting. It felt like, do you know what? This is like the dawn of a new era almost. The internet wasn't a thing really, but you did have more magazines were out. There was more channels on the telly. There was Sky became a big thing. Celebrity took a new level where you started to get more and more sort of celebrity news, and it felt like you were in a sort of cultural revolution almost, where we were no longer being all narrow-minded, and it was like where in the 80s lads my age or my age, lads from my background might have listened to the Smiths and that was read the Manchester Evening Pink and gone to the football, and that was it. You had lads in the 90s who were a little bit more culturally switched on because they had that more information, they had it more accessible. It was there for you to read in magazines, to see on the telly, to experience, to go to the gigs and experience it. And a lot of us, like me and you, we embraced it. And I think I'm glad I got to see it. I was having this conversation. It's good you chose this one actually, because I was having this conversation in the office today about, do you think you grew up in the right era? Because when I was younger, I was always gutted I wasn't a bit older. I wish I'd have been born in 1970, so I could have gone to the Hacienda and things like that. Because I only went to the Hacienda once, and just before it shut down, it was shit. But I was thought, it would have been around when the acid house days and going raving and jumping in a car and going to a field in the middle of nowhere with a speaker and all that. But then I think, no, I'm glad I grew up in the era I did, because I felt like I was in the sort of the right times where you still had that sort of grittiness that came with our areas and our times, but you were part of this new time, a new era where everything was sort of becoming a bit more open-minded. Whether that was you're more accepting, we were more culturally diverse than ever. You know, the gay rights movement was a proper movement, and the Clause 28, I think, and all that sort of horrible shit that the Tories had done. But that was, I think, around that time got rid of. There was this. It just felt like this was a real exciting time to be a part of, and I think, in a funny way, Supermodels sort of personified that.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. I would never change the era I grew up in, because I know I had like my mates' older brothers who used to always say, "Oh, the Hacienda was fantastic," but they were all settled down with kids by the time fucking What's the Story came out, and I was like, "Yeah, sorry about that, mate. I'm fucking having this." You know what I mean? It's no way. No, I wouldn't change it for anything for the love of the money. I absolutely love the 90s. Go on, your go.
This is a bit of an odd one, but I don't think this is necessarily just about my choices and who I think. I think I have to look at it and think the 90s in the UK, if you want to talk about someone who was the most unlikely icon ever, but was someone who was as famous and as important to that time as anyone, then it is going to have to be some ginger-haired disc jockey from Warrington. It is, because I'm not even a massive fan. I'll be brutally honest. I think he's actually a great DJ, but I just think he summed up the 90s. He was everywhere. He was in the middle of it all, whether it was
Big Breakfast,
whether it was Don't Forget Your Toothbrush, whether it was CFI Friday, whether it was on the front pages of the papers marrying Billy Piper, or whether it was going out partying with Gaza. He was just Mr. 90s.
Yeah, true.
And he lived that dream, and he made millions, lost it all, bought a radio station, got sued, the works. And if anyone's wondering who I'm on about, I'm talking about Chris Evans, who, you've got to be honest about these sort of things. He was as an important figure in Britain in the 90s, pretty much as the Gallaghers were, or Kate Moss and people like that. Even though he didn't have the talent of them, even though he wasn't as good looking as them, he was like the go-to guy on television. He was everywhere, and he was constantly in the papers, constantly in the press. He was mates with everyone. Some of the best interviews I saw in the 90s were on CFI Friday and Big Breakfast and things like that. He had the Gallaghers on there. He'd have George Best, people like that. I don't know, Best, he was obviously past his best but in the 90s. But he'd have all the Britpop people were all on there, and it was just he was Mr. 90s, and it was just, I read his book. I think he's brought out a few, and I read one of his first books where he spoke about that era of going from. Funnily enough, he started at Q103, but it was Piccadilly 1152 at the time, as a work experience person.
Yeah, my mum and dad went to his leaving party when he left.
Really?
Left Q103. Yeah, they went in the Piccadilly Plaza. They went to his leaving party.
That's what I mean, and me and you've been there, and I used to work there. And the funny thing is, I used to work with Paul Lockett, who knew Chris Evans, and he used to read the news when Chris Evans was there. And he told me a story, and I think it's in his book as well, where around the time of Live Aid, I think it was, or just after that, they interviewed Bob Geldof. They flew to Dublin and interviewed Bob Geldof, and they had it on a cassette. This is back in the days where you didn't download it or you didn't email it, or even I don't even think compact discs were a main thing there. It was on a tape cassette. So they flew to Dublin, this massive interview for 11:52. Flew back to Manchester. They've got it on a radio cassette, tape cassette. Sorry. Chris Evans comes in. He's looking for a cassette to tape something on, and he takes the Bob Geldof interview by accident and tapes over it. And there was nothing he could do. It's gone. He just takes over like the biggest interview for the station, and it was just like, well, that's it. It's gone. There's nothing we can do. Do you know what I mean? Like, we can't. You know what I mean? It's not like you got a backup file. That's it. It was on that same. He takes over it. But he proper lived the dream. You know, he married the pop star. He made millions. He made Ginger Productions. I think at one point he got offered. I read his book. He got offered £54 million for it. He turned it down, and he ended up taking 250 grand for it in the end. So he missed out on millions. And he said, you know, I think he sort of says, would I change anything about it? No, I wouldn't. You know, I enjoyed the ride sort of thing. And it was weird because he was the almost sort of antithesis of the likes of Liam Gallagher, the likes of Shaun Ryder, the likes of any other 90s icons you want to say about. You know, it was a guy who was from an area or a town, Warrington, that isn't, you know, it's not the most well-known place in Britain. Everyone knows Manchester, everyone knows Liverpool. Birmingham, Warrington is a bit like, where's that? Whereabouts is that? Oh, right, sort of in between Liverpool and Manchester. Okay. You know, ginger hair, wore glasses, wasn't particularly good looking, I think we're being brutally honest, but was this superstar. And in the 90s, especially the early 90s, you know, Friday night was Don't Forget Your Toothbrush. You watched that. I remember getting home once, I've been out with my mates, and I walked to my house, and all the lights in the street, everyone was flickering the living room lights. And I walked in my house, and my mum stood by the door, by the light switch, flicking the lights on and off in the front room. And I was like, "What are you doing?" You know, I felt like I'm walking. You know, you think like walking into the Twilight Zone or something. Like all the lights in the street, and, you know, Justin Mohammed was walking down the street. It was like an ordinary night. Little did he know he had entered the Twilight Zone. I was only about 14. I think I probably started smoking weed, which didn't help as well. So I was like, "Oh my god." And I got in, and mum was like, "Oh, you know, don't forget your toothbrush." He says if he sees your lights flashing, Chris Evans is gonna take you on holiday. And I was like, but he did. He found a street somewhere and did it. And then there was one time I remember he took the whole audience, the whole studio audience, on holiday. Like, that was the whole thing. Don't forget your toothbrush. I'll take you on holiday. And then he did TFI Friday, and like you say, the Big Breakfast, which changed breakfast television. Breakfast television used to be dreadful. It was like TV with Nick Owen and Ann Diamond in fucking pastel-coloured jumpers, talking about Margaret Thatcher's fucking new policy on immigration. And it was like, oh, you know what? Get this off me telly. There's nothing on the telly in the morning for us to watch. And then all of a sudden, you've got this crazy show where you've got this guy who's just full of energy, really funny, really weird. You've got Gabby Roslin, who was just more or less a straight man, straight woman, but was likable. You had Paula Yates on the bed doing interviews. And it was crackers in a house. It was all in this house, set in this house in the countryside or wherever it was.
It was like a blur. It was like a Blur video, wasn't it?
Excellent. It really was.
Before the Blur video, Zig and Zag. Remember them?
Zig and Zag. I almost forgot. It was Zig and Zag. They used to do the interviews, but like they'd get decent people on to interview. Like, you know, they'd interview them and these puppets. I mean, you know, you watch that now, you'd be thinking, what on earth is this? This is, if that happened now, it'd be in one of the suggested videos there on YouTube. That's where it'd end up, on a YouTube list. It would never get near a television. But in those days, it was like, it was new, it was fresh, and it sort of reinvented the breakfast show. He reinvented a lot of shows. He reinvented the evening TV. He owned the space there. He did it with breakfast. He made lots and lots of money, lost it all. But for a brief period, Chris Evans was a massive part of 90s Britain. He was a massive part of it, and he was. And I think it's only right to acknowledge that, because many people will be going, "What? You're off your fucking head. You could have picked someone better than him." But he was from when I was about, you know, through the 90s, when I was a kid growing up through that era, he was everywhere. And whether you liked him or not, he was very successful.
I won't have a bad word said about Chris Evans. He said some very nice stuff about me on his radio show. So thank you very much.
Which one? On Radio 2?
Yeah, Radio 2. I did some poems for the FA Cup that was on his show, and he goes, "Oh, that was absolutely fantastic, brilliant. Let's get him on the show." And he never did, but yeah. So he's been very kind about my work. So I'll not have anything said about bad about Chris Evans. But I was just thinking, then, what's the Mount Rushmore in America? You'd have the Gallaghers, Chris Evans, and Kate Moss, wouldn't you? You know, if there was a 90s Mount Rushmore, I'll put that out on Twitter. Actually, that'd be a good. That'd be a good.
Well, he's up there, and if you get a chance, mate, read. I think he's brought out several memoirs of a fruitcake, I think they're called. But the one that I read was his radio career and how it, you know, I mean, he more or less went to London with nothing, and then got a gig. I think worked on Danny Baker's show, and just rose through the ranks. Just made it work.
But again, it's these stories, isn't it, of taking chances and going and having a punt on yourself and stuff there. And this is again the same thing that runs through the 90s. I'm going to from one person who wears glasses to another, who will be my next one, who probably not the best looking, but for me, I think his dress sense has aged better than that of Liam Gallagher. Because when I walk around the street now and I see anyone with the haircut that Liam Gallagher had in 1997, I do cringe ever so slightly and think, grow up, mate. It's okay. The dream is gone. You know, fucking put it in a photo box and, you know, in a photo book and look back at it when you're on your own, you sad fuck. This guy, wow. So this guy, I think his dress sense has aged better than Liam Gallagher. And I always thought he was a better, not songwriter, but I think he was a better lyricist by a country mile than Noel Gallagher. And if you can disagree with me, if you want, like, I'd get involved in the comments. But Jarvis Cocker, for me, when we're talking about people who spoke about, I don't want to do the pun, I'm going to do it, common people, that, you know, that's who he spoke about when he's talking about, like, wood chip on the wall or misshapes, mistakes, misfits, raised in a diet of broken biscuits. And he just did it. He was so tongue-in-cheek with his writing, and he was the original hipster. You walk around the Northern Quarter, every fucker's dressing like 90s Jarvis Cocker now in Manchester. That everyone don't need glasses, wears them, and then dresses, you know, in the 12 shades of beige outfits. But like Pulp were absolutely phenomenal, and for me, I love them alongside Radiohead. It was great to have them to sort of even out the balance, that because the whole Blur and Oasis thing just got so fucking huge, and it was just, you were losing, and I think even the artists themselves, when you look at the state of Be Here Now, they lost track of the actual music and got, you know, cocaine obviously took a massive influence on the music and their lives and career following. And but Jarvis Cocker's lyrics are just absolutely phenomenal. It's always been a massive influence on me in the way I sort of write. And it's not glamorizing the everyday, but it's that there's always sort of stories to tell about that. And the Jarvis Cocker and the Pulp actually started in 1979 or 1980, really. So yeah, they've been going for at least a decade before the 90s. And then that perseverance to get through. And it's this story again of just fucking, you know, trying your hardest to carry on and stuff. And I think that was there's a great, I can't remember the name of it now, but there's a great documentary on Amazon about Pulp. But again, he got like they did a come down album called Hardcore, and it's proper depressing, mate. It's like, it is the fucking come down album of cokes and stuff. It's all about helping the aged and you know, dying and stuff. It's like, it's a bad album, but for me, it's always the sort of bookmark album at the end. The bookend of the night is the Hardcore album by Pulp. But I just, and then obviously can't not talk about him with him mooning fucking Michael Jackson at the Brits. Were there any, I know, outside of Diana's bad travel advice when she went to France, fucking. I'm not getting on my 5 gig. Princess Diana's TripAdvisor. No, the tunnels were shit. Right.
The People's Princess, eh? That's how you sum up a tragic death.
I know it's bad that she died and that, but like,
that's nice of you to say.
she killed that summer, or Elton John did, with fucking when he brought that candle in the window and all that. It ruined it. I remember getting home.
It was a tragedy she died, but she killed that summer. I'm glad to see you've not been selfish about the death of the people.
I remember the night she died, and I think I'd come home from 42nd Street and I snuck in, came home, and my mum's sobbing her out at the fucking dining room table. I thought my dad had died. And then fucking, I was like, oh, Princess Diana's then being really overly dramatic. And then my sister ran out to our price and bought that fucking Elton John shite. And I don't get royals. And Princess Diana's a lovely person. I won't wish death on anyone. And this has gone off on a right tangent. But I was just saying that iconic moments in culture in the 90s, obviously Diana's tragic death, but also Jarvis Cocker getting his ass out to Michael Jackson on stage at the Brits was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, that was Earth song, wasn't it? And I think he took a bit of offense because Michael Jackson was on the stage with all these kids as a Christ-like figure holding his hands out, and the kids all came to him and whatnot. It's just typical Michael Jackson affair. But I won't have a bad word said about MJ. But yeah, Jarvis Cocker.
Michael Jordan, what?
Yeah.
Oh, we're not going down that road. We'll have to do an 80s podcast for fucking that. He was guilty.
No. Michael Jackson sucked my dick. It was the best weekend ever. Sorry.
Just for anyone out there that hasn't seen Dave Chappelle, Michael Jackson didn't suck Jay Motty's dick.
I want to let him know. I mean, Joe.
You would have done as well. You well would have done. What's a bit of Jesus juice?
The king of pop. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I'm not ruling it out. Yeah, Jarvis Cocker took offense. A lot of people love what Jarvis Cocker did because he felt it was a bit sort of distasteful, Michael Jackson's performance. But beside the thing at the Brits, Jarvis Cocker was, again, he was different, wasn't he? Like, and he was genuinely different at that time. When you had the whole Britpop, and I keep using that term because it's an easy one to use to sum it up, even though I didn't really like it at the time. When you had that whole Britpop movement going on, he was an individual within that. A lot of them were sort of carbon copies of one another.
Yeah.
He wasn't. He was this guy, like you said, his lyrics were just, sort of not Morrissey-esque, but that sort of thing of like almost embracing the fact you're not cool. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
they were like Ken Loach songs. They're like songs about Ken Loach films.
Like that sort of going through puberty and meeting girls and being obsessed and doing and struggling and stuff like that. And do you know what I mean? Just weird, like those little things that everyone can sort of relate to. And he was
like stuck into Michael Jackson's pee-pee.
I thought it was the way around. That. I thought the deal was he'd be. We'll discuss it off camera. This is making your Princess Diana ruined my summer story look positively wonderful. We've gone on a right rabbit hole here. Dismissing the death of the people's princess and talking about the king of pop filleting us. Royalty. That's the royal vibe we're on. But yeah, he was, and you're right. 90s Jarvis Cocker. He's up there, and he on that Mount Rushmore that you're suggesting or that you're talking about. And I think I was never a massive Pulp fan. I could only name you the big hits. I didn't listen to many of their albums or any of their albums or ever go and see them. But I like the fact that Jarvis Cocker was sort of true to himself. He wasn't buying into anything. He wasn't trying to be cool. He just was cool because of the way he was. Do you know what I mean? And everyone knew who Jarvis Cocker was. Everyone could have pointed out Jarvis Cocker on a magazine or whatever. He was sort of Mr. Again, in the same way that Liam Gallagher or Kate Moss were, or even Chris Evans, he was an iconic person during that time. In the sense that everyone knew him, and he, again, in the papers everywhere, the cover of magazines, on Top of the Pops, on the interviews, he was a great person for that era as well, because there's a lot of kids or youngsters who were growing up who felt, isolated and disenfranchised, and sort of didn't feel cool or whatever.
Yeah,
and it was like, you know what? Look at Jarvis Cocker. Do you know what I mean? He's made it. He's big. He's talking to me in the same way that maybe in the 80s, I keep going back to the same way that maybe Morrissey spoke to people in the 80s. And I just think, you can't have this conversation about the 90s in Britain and not talk about Jarvis Cocker. And I think one of the things with Jarvis Cocker as well is, as like Liam Gallagher, you talk about him being a success in America or flirting with America. Very English feel to Jarvis Cocker. He's almost like certain artists, they're just very English. Do you know what I mean? Or British, I should say. Like Paul Weller always has that vibe about him. And, Peter Kay as a comedian always has that vibe where it's not like, do you know what I mean? It's sort of, that's where he belongs and that's where he's happy. Yeah, because he's not trying to break over to the other side.
Liam Gallagher was wearing the rock star's coat, whereas Jarvis Cocker, there was that sort of What do you like? Not what's the saying about being British? They don't have the ego for. I think being a rock star is very American in some ways. Do you know what I mean? Having that sort of extrovert, where Jarvis Cocker didn't. He was quite introvert. And yeah, I just think he's it's just incredible lyricist. And again, I think he's one of the best lyricists of the 90s.
Well, I would never argue with you about lyricists. I might argue with you about their princesses and how to remember them. We did get a day off work, if you forget. So let's just, it wasn't
Who was working in the 90s?
I was at Asda. Sometimes I used to turn up as well. So can't disagree with that choice. I've been thinking about this, and I've been trying to sort of think of the icon, and people that sort of spring to mind as iconic during the 90s in the UK. And this might seem a little left field slightly because it's not really in the same vein as the ones we've been speaking about, but it is an actor who was, for a brief period, probably the biggest name or the most recognizable face on the planet. Yet shouldn't have been, because it was all very weird. And I'll get to what I'm saying. Anthony Hopkins is my choice. And if you think, why Anthony Hopkins? But I mean, I don't know if you remember Silence of the Lambs, because I'm a little bit older. I know we're similar age, but I was only young when it came out. I think it was 92 or whatever. And Hannibal Letzer is one of the all-time great characters in film. One of the all-time great movie villains, one of the all-time great almost movie horror characters. And Anthony Hopkins, who was this sort of well-trained Welsh Shakespearean type actor who, he'd been in a few films and he'd done a few, I think he'd moved over to America, became an iconic figure based on this film, this role as Hannibal Letzer. I remember watching this, and it was so sinister and it was so captivating. And he obviously won the Academy Award for it. Silence of the Lambs won Best Picture. Jodie Foster won Best Actress. I think Jonathan Demme won Best Director. It was like the first film. I think it won Best Adapted Screenplay as well. It was the first film, I think, in years since Bringing Up Baby or something that had won the Big Five in Best Actor, Best Actress, Screenplay and or Adapted Screenplay, and film and director. I know most people won't give a shit about that, but as a bit of a Oscars geek, it interests me. But Anthony Hopkins was just fantastic in this role. He was, and he sort of, for many people, it felt like he came from nowhere, because here's this guy, and many people sort of like hadn't heard of him, didn't know a lot about him. But that role immediately became part of movie culture. And it is almost like the go-to role in it now, the go-to performance. When you talk about playing a psycho, you don't maybe talk about Anthony Perkins in Psycho anymore. You talk about Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Letzer, and you talk about Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Letzer in Silence of the Lambs, because I know he's played him a few times, and he's played him in Hannibal and Red Dragon. But that one, it really sort of, it was shocking. It was scary, it was everything. It was just mesmerizing, and obviously, Jodie Foster's fantastic in that film. And I think that Anthony Hopkins sort of, he sort of, there was a time when British actors took over Hollywood a little bit. You had some of the main sort of actors and stars and Oscar winners in particular were British. So you had Hugh Grant, was a massive actor. Four Weddings and a Funeral was a huge film. Both sides of the pond. The Full Monty, as you mentioned, this film about a load of steel workers from Sheffield who take the clothes off in a bingo hall became one of the biggest films of the decade. It was just felt like Britain was sort of, the whole Rule Britannia thing was taking over in the movies, and Jeremy Irons won an Oscar, I think, at that time as well. Kate Winslet, another one. Titanic. One of the main stars of Titanic, the biggest film of all time, is this, again, classically trained British actress. Emma Thompson, Kenneth Branagh, these were all massive stars who sort of, won awards and were in these big films and mixed the blockbusters with the classical type films. Alan Rickman, who we both love, was massive during that time as well. I know this after Die Hard, but in the 90s he carried on, he was big. But Anthony Hopkins was probably the one who, if you had to name a British actor from that era who really, really sort of got into everyone's psyche, it would be Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Letzer. And I know he did lots of other films in the 90s, and you could say, well, some of them were good, some of them weren't so good. But that performance and that film by him is something that sort of is bigger than just a 90s iconic role or performance. It's all-time, one of the all-time most memorable performances. And I think that it's worth adding to my list because of that, because as a film fan, when I was looking at it, and I was thinking, 90s iconic, who's iconic? And I just kept thinking about Anthony Hopkins in that role and that performance that sort of broke box office records, broke award records, and made Anthony Hopkins a household name, and Hannibal Letzer a household name as well. And, it gave a lot of people, myself included, a few nightmares.
Yeah, I absolutely love that film. I remember watching it on my mum's VHS player. And she remember first walking in and it was on. And I think it was the bit where he tucks his chap up his back, so he looks like he's got lady parts. And then it sort of set the tone actually, because I think the sort of sinister and hot films of the 80s weren't as graphic as it became in the 90s. You know what I mean? When you look at Silence of the Lambs and then you move on and you look more like Reservoir Dogs or Train Spotting and stuff like that. The violence in films seemed to go up a little bit more, didn't it, when it comes to that? But the Silence of the Lambs seemed to be the catalyst to that. It was only years later, and I'm talking maybe like 5-6 years ago, I watched it again, until I realised he chucks a lot of jizz in the cell. I didn't realise that's what it was.
Yeah, well, she says, because he kills, that's Mig, is it Miggs or Riggs, the guy in the cell next door?
Riggs, in it, yeah.
Yeah.
No, Riggs is out of it. Isn't Riggs out of Lethal Weapon?
Yeah, no, is it? I know mine Riggs, but yeah, the what's it? Is it? Well, hang on a minute, let me have a look here.
What are you typing in? Jizz and Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, he does that, and I think Anthony Hopkins, he kills himself, doesn't he, Miggs, in the end? Doesn't he swallow his own tongue? And the thing is that Hannibal Letzer, because he's annoyed at how he's been rude to Jodie Foster, to Clarice Starling, talks to him and convinces him to kill himself, basically. If you remember the film, then he says, like, he gets there and there's a telly, and evangelical preachers on the telly, and the volume's turned down, and he says, once you leave, the volume will be back up because Dr. Chilton likes his petty mind games as punishment for Miggs. So he's like punishing him,
right.
because he's more or less killed him. I'm sticking with the Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Letzer thing, is why he's my icon. But another favourite film of mine in the 90s was Nixon by Oliver Stone, and he played.
I've not seen it.
He plays Richard Nixon, and I love that film. I think it might even be my favourite Oliver Stone film, and I love Oliver Stone, especially, massive. JFK was one of my favourite films, but I think it's such a good film, that such a complex character, Richard Nixon. He's just ridiculous. But Anthony Hopkins, I think he was nominated for an Oscar for that as well. So that sort of cemented him.
Whoa!
So,
fucking Ladybird, what the fuck are you doing? Ugh.
You don't like my missus? You act like Ladybirds, like the most horrible creatures you've ever seen. She does that when she sees Ladybird.
No, I don't trust
no, what's up? You don't trust a pretty little ladybird that's, like something off an Enid Blyton novel. Jesus wept. I thought you were an hard man from fucking Longsight, and you're getting.
I never declare. I'm a fucking poet for a living. I'm not a fucking hard man. Right, yeah. Anthony Hopkins, great. I went to see Joe Black at the Odeon. One of my first dates, and that was the fucking. I wasted money on both accounts because it was fucking horrible on both accounts. Yeah. Bad film, that.
And it's got the worst scene in film history, isn't it?
The worst. Go on.
When he's walking off, he gets hit by the car.
Oh, at the beginning with the coffee and they're
walking over each other's shoulder, him and Claire Filani. It's at the end.
I didn't know it was the worst scene in the world. But
watch it, right? I think I tweeted it not long ago. I think I tweeted it as if 2020 was a movie scene, like last week.
Right.
It's ridiculous. It's bonkers. Well, that film's awful. Yeah, like it's based on that. I think it's an original film called Death Takes a Holiday, where Brad Pitt's death in it, Joe Black.
Yeah.
And it makes fuck all sense as well.
Yeah, it's not a good film. Not there, yeah. But Andy Hopkins, absolutely fantastic actor and brilliant film. And I'll probably watch that, Nixon, as due to your influence this year, I've been binging all sorts of things political. Thanks very much for that, Jay. Yeah, woohoo! My wife is buzzing with you. My choices. What watching tonight? Yeah. My last one will be. We started with Robert Carlyle. I'm going to end with a writer that has probably been one of the biggest influences on me in terms of picking up a pen. A lot of the people I've talked about tonight were influences on me creatively, but as a person growing up, was Irving Welsh. Train Spotting, as you talked at the beginning, was just fucking huge. Probably the biggest film of the 90s for Britain. If not financially, then as a cultural impact. The amount of people who are taking, copying the adverts, that Choose Life line, which has been, I think Dettol tried to do it again this year for fucking a terrible advertising campaign for the coronavirus. That didn't work very well. But yeah, I actually picked Train Spotting up the first time in about 94, 95. And I could put it back down because I couldn't read it. And I didn't realise, because have you read it, Jay?
I read it years ago. It's written as they say it in it.
So it's all written in dialect. And I thought I got through it. And I got through the first few pages. I thought, fuck that, I'm not reading that. And then later on, someone borrowed me Filth, which I think was his third book, which I think came out in '98. Have you read Filth? Bruce Robertson, where he's the sort of he's the cop where he's got a tapeworm.
I've watched the film with James McAvoy.
The film's fucking garbage. The film's absolute shit, but the book is absolutely brilliant. It's as good. I think it's as good as Trainspotting as a book. But it's just again the influence of Irving Welsh, who was this writer who was coming again same thing as he spoke about all night. Really, we just talk about his own surroundings and his mates being hooked on drugs. But that idea of actually taking that Glaswegian identity and then owning, not only telling the stories but telling it in your vernacular, was just so impressive for me. And it's just like, I'm not, and this is another thing about the 90s, it wasn't a time where people were adapting to somebody else's culture. We were making our own culture. And I think Irving Welsh, when he did that, decided to write Train Spotting about his mates on drugs, but to do it in that sort of way where he was using his own language and not bowing down to the colonial powers, as they say in the actual, in the book, was just fucking huge. And I was fortunate to, when I went back to university, I was fortunate enough to meet Irving Welsh. He signed one of my books, which is the something of the bedroom chefs or something. It's not one of his better ones. But I was asking him for advice. He's a tall fucker as well, mate. He must be 6'5". Yeah, he's massive, really big Glaswegian. No, not Glaswegian. Edinburgh. Edinburghian? What do you call him? I don't know. Scotch.
Edinburgh. No, I don't know.
Up there. Anyway, but he gave me something he wrote me a book because I was asking him I'm at university, I want to be a writer, blah blah blah, and his advice was to always on the front of the book it's got Dear David, rewrite, keep rewriting, and that's it. Just editing. He goes, the hardest part of writing is getting something down, but it's the editing where all the magic comes down. And it's just it was a lovely bloke and stuff. He said he's not hanging around to watch Train Spotting for the fucking 400th time. He's off to the pub. But yeah, and he's great on Twitter as well. I love
him on Twitter.
Really nice bloke. So Irving Welsh will be my last icon for top 5 UK icons, non-football.
How many have you done?
5, I think.
Go on.
You did Liam Gallagher.
Jesus fucking webs. They give out degrees now, don't they, to anyone? You just turn up and you get a degree. Fuck, man. Have you ever been to Thailand? An English degree, not maths, dickhead. Did you not go to the lesson in maths where they taught you to count to 5? Did you miss that? Did you have a day off then?
Yeah, we had a teacher from Burnley. 1, 2, 3.
6 on one hand. Apologies for our Burnley viewers. Well, you can think of another one. Well, plus love Irving Welsh, love Train Spotting. Read it years ago. I need to revisit it, but it was a hard read because it's I remember it.
Read Filth.
I'm like, what the fuck is this? But yeah, obviously Train Spotting, as we mentioned earlier, iconic. And I'm with you. He's an absolute force for good on Twitter.
Yeah,
holding the politicians and everyone to account in that sort of really witty but cutting Scottish way. He has. The next one I'm going to choose is we're not doing. Did we say we're not doing sport or not doing football?
We're not doing football.
We're not doing football. So we are doing sport. There's an icon from the 90s in the UK who I have to name because he was a big part of my childhood. And there was a time when him and Chris Eubank were like the biggest, and Nigel Benn were the biggest boxers around. But he really, really sort of almost encapsulated the 90s in a way. And he absolutely was revered by so many fans of not just boxing, like even non-boxing fans used to love him. And that's Prince Nazim Mohammed. He was just like one of the biggest stars of the 90s. He just was. And I remember, and this was back when you used to be able to get boxing on like ITV. And everything about him, you know, he had his leopard skin shorts. He'd jump into the ring over the rope. I know that Chris Eubank did that as well. Very sort of cocky. The way that he boxed with the corkscrew uppercuts and his hands down low, and he was all this. He didn't have any guard. He was just always messing about. He always came. His ring entrances were just ridiculous. Sometimes they lasted longer than the fights. It'd take 10 minutes to get into the ring, and the fight would last a minute. Just knocking out opponents left, right, and centre. And it's easy to look at him now, and you see him. He's bursting out of his suit, and he's coming out with quite outrageous statements on boxing commentary. But in the 90s, he was the sort of the go-to guy, even more so than Nigel Benn or Frank Bruno or Chris Eubank or any of these sort of British iconic boxers, because there was a few boxers that were very popular in Britain at the time. Prince Nazeem was the man. He was. He really was. You know, he won the WBO title. He beat Steve Robinson in Cardiff, I think, and then defended it against some of his opponents weren't great, even being brutally honest, but he battered them basically. And if you're watching a fight on a Saturday night on the telly, as a kid, I didn't really care. But then he stepped up a level. He beat Tom Johnson. He picked up the IBF title, if memory serves. And then he had an absolute humdinger of a fight against Kevin Kelly when they knocked each other down about 5 times each. And then I think was it Marcos? Was it Barrera who beat him? I think it was Marcos Antonio Barrera who eventually beat him. And then he came back for one more fight, I think, after that. And then
fell off, didn't he?
Yeah, Marco Antonio Barrera it was. And then he came back for one more fight, won it on a decision, and then just never fought again. It was a bit of a shame because I would like to have seen more of him. I think he retired when he was still in his 20s. But in the 90s, Nazim Mohammed was everywhere. Prince Nazeem even had a song out at one point, Prince is in the House. I remember it well. It got to about number 32 in the charts, I think, utter shite. But, that was it. He was doing loads of interviews, different type of fighter. No one had ever seen anyone like him before. Very cocky. An Asian icon as well. It was, it wasn't a lot of, at that time, Asian sportsmen or women or cultural icons who everyone loved, white Britain or black Britain or whatever.
I couldn't name another one now.
Well, this is it. It was a difficult, even in the 90s, it was even, more difficult. And I think a lot of people were a bit sort of more narrow-minded around it. I mean, there's still that goes on now, you're right. But he everyone loved Naz, as he was known, or Prince Nazeem or whatever. And he was just a character. And you'd see him on things like, I remember he was on Fantasy Football once. You remember the Fantasy Football show with Baddiel and Skinner? It's not really stood up well to the test of time with blackface and stuff like that they used to get up to. But at the time, it was very, it was one of the most popular shows. And he was on there, and he's from Sheffield. And I mean, he basically just didn't give a shit about football. He said he supported Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday. He was a Sheffield fan, which makes fuck all sense. But I remember him taking the piss out of him or trying to, and he threatened to slap them both. And you can see he wasn't like joking. He was like, "You're getting a bit cheeky now. I might have to start slapping you in a minute." He was a real sort of idiosyncratic guy. Do you know what I mean? There was no one else like him. Boxers were pretty much run of the mill. They were like, they'd go on there, they'd bash their opponent, they'd verbally bash him, they'd say, I'm going to knock him out. Seen it all before, but he had something different. He had that charisma, he had that spark, he had that sort of likability, and that almost craziness that made him so popular. And again, like most of the 90s icons, I think a lot of these icons, when we talk about the 90s, some of them you're looking at them at like a sort of a 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 year period. But I think Nazim Mohammed, when you're going to look at him, you're probably looking at the last 5 years of the 90s. That was like, I think he won his title in 95. And then I think, obviously he kept it until the end of the 90s. But for 5 years, especially in that period, he was like, one of the most popular people in Britain. And even if you didn't like him, you watched him. Some people didn't like him. Very cocky. He's Asian. There's we still had gammons in those days who wanted to watch them because he wanted to get knocked out. Like I was someone to teach him a lesson. I'd heard that sort of shit in the pub and stuff like that. But he just kept winning, and he kept winning in style as well. I think his record. Let me just see if I can pull it up here. He had a ridiculous, I think, pretty ridiculous knockout record. Yeah, 37 fights, 36 wins, 31 by knockout. So just boom.
And he had one loss.
Yeah, he lost to Marco Antonio Barrera. Funnily enough, I remember this as well. We talk about Piccadilly 1152 and Key 103. They used to do this thing where they used to ring up, prank phone calls that are dead now. You can't do them anymore. But they used to ring up pretending to be Prince Nazim Mohammed, and they'd ring up they'd ring up the hairdressers and say they wanted to put their orangutan in for hairdressing, and they'd say things like, "This is Prince Nazim Mohammed. Like, I'm booking in my orangutan. Boom, me orangutan," and it was just nonsense, but it was hilarious. It really was. And the guy who used to do it sounded like, I think it might have been Steve Penk or someone, but yeah, it was great. And he was just a big part of that. You sort of put him in the same bracket as, and it sounds, people will be looking at this going, "What the fuck are you on about, Jay?" But he was like as big as Liam Gallagher here in Britain. He was as big as Eric Cantona. He was as big as Hugh Grant or whoever. You know what I mean? He was an icon in every sense. Jarvis Cocker, he was. Everyone knew who Nazim Hamid was. Everyone knew what he did. Everyone knew what he looked like, what he sounded like. He was massive, and whether you liked him or loathed him, you wanted to watch him. He gets my vote as one of mine.
Inescapable in the 90s was Prince Nazim Hamid, and fantastic value to watch. And even if you didn't like him with his cocky attitude off, you could not take away from what he could do in the ring when he was on form. And an incredible record. Right, so for my last one, as I can't count, and they've been thrown on the spot, I'm going to go for, we've got to mention them because, huge girl band, and they were, they epitomised, Britain in the 90s. I suppose that their music coming out was the end of guitar music and stuff. I don't think anyone touched this girl band at all. I think, whether you like their songs or not, you just can't escape the influence that they've had on the world since, and that's got to be, All Saints.
Yes.
Never Ever was absolutely fantastic. Mel Black, who was the other ones? Nicole Scherzinger. No, that was she's out of Pussycat Dolls. Nicole Appleton.
Yeah, Natalie Appleton and the talent.
What was she called?
Shaznay Lewis. The
Shaznay Lewis. Mel Black was the talent, man.
No, Shaznay wrote all the songs.
We're talking two different things.
Oh,
sorry, I've been a bit of a prick there. I had a thing for Mel Black. Oh,
I get it. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. See, here's me talking about a talented young woman who wrote lots of iconic hits, and is you going, "Oh yeah, I had a bit of a thing for her."
Yeah. So, All Saints. I know. Obviously, Spice Girls were fucking ridiculous. You couldn't escape fucking Spice World. It was that they were as big for what they were doing as anybody else that we were talking about. And I don't think we've seen anything like it in terms of a girl band group. I think that they sort of set up everything that went afterwards, for better or for worse, with the X Factor and Pop Idol and all that sort of shit. I don't think we'd have had the likes of fucking Atomic Kitten and fucking whatever else is. I'm not really into pop music and shit, so I don't really know.
Find someone's off camera with a gun to your head. We wouldn't have had the likes of fucking Pop Factor and.
I just which one? Which one did you fancy?
Of the Spice Girls.
Yeah.
I don't know. When I was a kid, it was Jerry.
Yeah, I was Jerry, but I mean, I couldn't imagine she's not wife material, is she?
No, I mean, yeah, it wasn't really a massive sort of fan of them looks wise, but I do think like some of the songs were meant.
Two Become One was a tune.
That's it. I said this the other day in the office. That is an absolute tune.
No,
a pop tune.
Yeah.
That's a 10 out of 10 pop tune.
That Wannabe was absolute gash.
No, that was horrible.
Zigga, zigga, zigga,
In
zigga.
fact, when I say some of the songs were tunes, I think it's only Two Become One of them being.
And that Mama one was a bit emotional, you know, a bit Mother's Day.
Yeah,
flowers round.
Who do you think you are as well? Who do you think? Yeah. Anyway, we're going down a fucking rabbit hole. I do not want to get into naming favourites.
Right. Yeah, there we go.
Because you had to quickly Google a fucking answer. You've come up with that. You've literally just gone on your computer, right? I could see you were doing something and put in 90s Britain and fucking the Spice Girls have popped up. And then
the version that popped up was Jerry and the Union Jack.
All the enthusiasm of a death row prisoner on his way to the fucking electric chair. You've gone, the Spice Girls, you know, give us Pop Idol and X Factor and other things I don't like, but you know, they were all right.
Mate, you asked for 5. I've just given us fucking 9, mate.
Yeah, well, thankfully. I don't mind this is your bloody idea, this topic, and you've absolutely, you know, done your own work on the bus on the way to school.
I was busy fantasizing about being in MR5.
Yeah, I've still got one to go as well, haven't I? Because I think I've done Nazim Hamid, Chris.
Yeah, you've got. Yeah, well, I went first, Jane. It usually goes that way around. So
right. Listen, don't start lecturing me about maps. All right, sunshine. This would have been a top 9 if you had your way. I'm going to cheat slightly. I'm going to go with someone who may not be just remembered for the 90s, but was a part of the 90s.
Because they lived in it.
Sorry?
Because they lived in it.
Yeah, because they were around in the 90s. No, he was a part of the 90s, and for me growing up, there was the Manchester scene, you know, was massive. And I was quite young when it all kicked off in the late 80s, which is why I said I was cheating slightly because it was the 80s and the 90s. But I remember like the Moo cow hoodies and the kickers and the I left on the cutting room floor of a Happy Mondays video. I was in Rope for Luck, but I didn't make the cut.
I've seen that. So there was someone put it on the other day, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's 2 versions. There's an adult version, a kiddies version, and I was in the kids version, but I didn't make the final cut. So you know, the rest is history. But I'm going to go with as my final choice for 90s icons, just because I think he's left a bit of a legacy. The late great Tony Wilson.
Yeah.
You know, as I mentioned earlier about the Hacienda was like the center of the universe for a couple of years. Manchester in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of negativity around the city. We had the poll tax stuff. I think there was riots and stuff in Manchester, or, you know, it was kicking off in Manchester. The Strange Ways riots. You had, you know, unemployment was going through the roof. It was a difficult time. And yet, as Gunchester, that's when that moniker was formed. Gunchester, gun crime, Moss Side, and you know, South Manchester was kicking right off. And not in, you know, when it's your city, it's not great when you sort of picking up papers and seeing this shit day in, day out, and you think, you know, we're better than this, and we were. Yeah. And one thing we've always been good at is making music and leading the way culturally, and we did that in the 90s, the early 90s with the Manchester scene. You had all these bands and music, and you know, you had the Hacienda, you had the Stone Roses, you had the Happy Mondays, you had the Charlatans, you had the Spiral Carpets, you had places like, you know, Oldham and places like that coming on the map, and it was like, what, these guys are from where? And you know, sort of you know, this is all pre-Oasis stuff, and it was just an exciting time. And I was only a kid, you know. I was 10 in 1990 when it was probably at its peak, but I got to see it like I said, I was in the Happy Mondays video, and I remember saying to my dad, "Who the fuck are the Happy Mondays?" I didn't say fuck, 'cause I wouldn't have swore to him at that age, but I was like, "Who the hell are the Happy Mondays?" And he's like, "Oh, watch out for him." I think that was in the late 80s, wrote for Luck. But then they became, again, it was all very short and sweet, Manchester. When you look at it, it sort of shone brightly briefly and then went. And most of those bands had like one massive album or one big album. Like the Happy Mondays, I know you can look in, you can say, is it Pills and Spills and Bellyaches and Bummed for the two albums, but really it's only that second album or the Pills and Spills and Bellyache one. You know, they had the sort of Step On tune and Hallelujah and Loose Fit, and then you know they sort of faded. The Stone Roses' first album was, I know that was again, I think that was late 80s, but was massive. They took 6 years, I think, to make the second album, which was a bit underwhelming. You know, a lot of Spiral Carpets had like the massive EP or whatever it was. There was always, it was like very brief, but it was amazing for that time. And at the center of all this was Tony Wilson, who, you know, had a share in Factory Records, a share in the Hacienda. I think he was the sort of manager of the Happy Mondays. He was doing all these things. He was on Granada all the time. He was the main face of Granada. And if you've not seen 24 Hour Party, people, and you're watching this podcast and you've made it through this podcast with us to this point in it, right near the end, watch 24 Hour Party, people, because it perfectly sums up a lot of what went on in the 70s, 80s and 90s in Manchester musically. Steve Coogan plays Tony Wilson. He plays him superbly as well. And I just think Tony Wilson is one of those that he sort of sums up a lot about Manchester, but he's from Salford as well, Tony Wilson. But like, he's this guy, very intelligent, very creative and charismatic, but just a bit mad. Like, no business acumen whatsoever, no foresight in terms of like, he could see what was happening with movements and plan, and you know, could tap into that and say, you know, this is going to be massive and da-da-da. But he never made any money out of it. He never had a long-term strategy. It was always like, let's do this. This is a great idea. Yeah, great. You know, this is a guy that when, was it New Order released Blue Monday?
Yeah, they put they would cost more to press than it was to actually to sell. They were losing like 7 pence, I think. And actually,
have you got it?
The original pressing there.
That is
look at that, £2.50.
So Tony Wilson lost 7p on that. Because, like you say, the vinyl or the whatever the sleeve cost more than the song, and they were like, "Well, no one's going to buy it anyway. It doesn't matter." And it was one of the biggest selling songs of the year. But he didn't care. He was just about the artistry, the creativity, and it's weird because I always think of Tony Wilson. Like, I know it sounds stupid, but you know, like I'm doing stuff on the channel and stuff, and you think, "Oh, we've got the money to do this," or "Well, should we do that?" And you just think, "Can we try and make it happen?" He was one of those guys that always wanted to try and make things happen.
He didn't.
It's just great. It's just great. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, sorry. So Tony Wilson for me was always his like I said, he had a business acumen, but he had drive and tenacity, and it wasn't that he didn't have a plan. He didn't give a fuck if we needed a plan. He saw the end goal and where you were, and just said, right, well, that's what we're going to do. And then sort of put wheels in motion towards that, regardless of what was going to happen on the in-between. And that was obviously his unraveling at the end. And I think, what did he say in 24 Hour Party, people? He was a bit part player in his own film or something like that. But yeah, I mean, the Manchester Man, don't they? I think that's the poem, that's the epitaph that's on his gravestone at the cemetery. But yeah,
sorry, miss. I just reminded me something. I remember when Andy Burnham was campaigning to be, I can't remember, I think it was for mayor, and he had an event somewhere in the city centre. I forget where it was, like a Labour event, and he told us a story about Tony Wilson. It was all very Mancunian. All the music they played was from Manchester bands, and he was talking about Manchester. He was obviously trying to sort of remind everyone that he's not just a Scouser, but he, you know, embracing Manchester. And he was telling a story about Tony Wilson. He said they came up with this idea of like joining the Northwest together, and it was going to be like Liverpool and Manchester and like the Granada area basically would become its own almost country. And he was trying to push this idea through and like how we can all work together and make the Northwest, it's like one entity almost. And it didn't really happen in the end, obviously, because, you know, it hasn't happened. But Andy Burnham was like, he was part of this at first with Tony Wilson, and he said like, and Tony Wilson was like, we need to have a sign like on the motorway, so when you get to the Northwest, people know. We can have it in Kiel. We can have a big sign that says, "This is the Northwest." And he said it almost like a threat. It was like, and Andy Burnham was like, "Yeah, Tony, I think the penny dropped of Andy Burnham. This guy's like just full of beans and energy, but a bit nuts." And it obviously never got off the ground, but he was that kind of guy who was like, "Let's do this, come on."
Yeah.
And he made a lot of things happen. And, his legacy, that music, that time, those memories, and that film of his life, basically. I know he says there's a bit part player in it, but it is more or less a film of his life. 24-Hour Party people will live on forever.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, fantastic. Way to end it, I think. I've been Scotty, that's been Motty, that's been our top 9.5 icons of the 90s. Let us know who'd be on your 90s Mount Rushmore in the comments. Thanks a lot for everyone that's watched the one that we did put out on Monday. Comments and
two a week, Scotty, 2 in 3 days.
Wow, man, we are prolific. We are back again on Sunday recording another, and then we're doing a live next Tuesday, is it?
We need to make sure, because I got the debate one wrong, didn't I? I was stayed up one night and then wondered why it wasn't on, and it was because I've got the dates wrong. But yeah, I think it's next Tuesday. We're gonna have guests.
So next Wednesday.
Yeah, might be next Wednesday. The night of the election, the night of the US election.
But are they behind or ahead of us? I can't. Where is it in America?
What, the election?
I was joking, dickhead.
I don't know with you. Let's do a top 5. Hey, this is my final one after 4. What?
So it's in Canada, Vancouver.
Princess Diana, don't get me started on her death. You might all do that.
He did put a sour note on it. Anyway, we will let you know next week. I've been Scott.
Thanks for watching.